Welcome to today's episode of the AOCPMR podcast. I'm Meghan Mardashti, one of the AOCPMR's multimedia committee co-chairs and your host for today's episode. We have a very special episode with a very special guest, AOCPMR's very own Vice President, Dr. Nick Elwert. He is the Assistant Program Director at the University of Kentucky's Department of PM&R, and he also serves as the medical director for the stroke unit at Cardinal Hill Rehabilitation Hospital and brings a wealth of knowledge in neurorehabilitation, spasticity management, and PM&R education. He is also passionate about student and resident advocacy. So before we dive in, Dr. Nick, anything else that you'd like to add?
No, just thank you so much for having me on tonight and looking forward to talking about interviews.
Super excited. So today we'll answer some of the very popular questions around residency interviews and how to navigate this chapter of the match journey. So we'll start broad and then kind of narrow down with our questions. And for our first question, can you highlight some of the essential do's and don'ts that applicants should keep in mind during residency interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I will mention it is okay to be nervous. This is a very anxiety-producing time. Interviews, no matter what you are interviewing for, they can be stressful. But I really think by proper preparation and practicing, you can really ace these. And at the end of the day, right, as a someone who is involved in the interview process, you just want to be able to, we just want to get to know you. And so it's okay to be nervous, but try to take a couple deep breaths, prepare, and I'm sure you'll crush them. So let's talk a little bit about what to do before your interview. I know the question specifically was do's and don'ts of the interview process, but I think if we talk about preparing, I think it makes the interview process a little bit easier. So when you're looking at programs, you've received that interview invite, I really recommend do as much research as you can about that program as you can. So whether that is on their social media platforms, the program's website, take a look and see what that program has outlined so that you do all of your homework that you can to be prepared. The other thing is when you're joining for the interview day, make sure that you're enthusiastic, you're professional, you're respectful. Those kind of things go without saying, but at the end of the interview season, you can be really tired and really exhausted. So just try to make sure you recharge your batteries and that you're going in being enthusiastic to be there. One thing that can really help you as well during the interview process is try to find a connection to that program, whether it is a faculty member that you've met, a resident that you've met, or do you have a hometown connection, or maybe an alum from your medical school. Try to reach out to them, build that connection, and then that would make your day even easier for you. You've built those connections and you feel a little bit more comfortable. I think some of the do's and don'ts that I would recommend for the interview itself, we'll talk about some of the don'ts first. So some of the don'ts, one don't would be don't come unprepared. So do your homework, be prepared, show that you have looked up the program that you're interviewing in, and that will go a really long way. One of the don'ts that I always talk about is when you're asking questions, don't just ask questions to ask questions. So I almost guarantee you that you will get a question that says, hey, what questions do you have? Make sure that they are well thought out questions, or right, if you've looked at the website and you can't figure out some information, or you have questions about the curriculum structure that you haven't gotten answered yet, mentioning, hey, I saw this on your website, or I saw this in your presentation. Can you explain it a little bit more? That tells me, hey, you've done your homework. You're really involved. You're paying attention. Don't just ask a question to ask a question. And then really the biggest do that I recommend is make sure you practice. So, right, if you're at a program that is doing a virtual interview, make sure that you're testing your internet connection wherever you're going to have that interview, making sure is the Wi-Fi stable, and all of those things that go into making sure you have a good connection, good audio, etc. If you're doing an in-person interview, being able to just practice talking, going through an interview, having someone that maybe but maybe, I don't know about, maybe your friends may not be able to be the best interviewer, but maybe someone that that says, hey, can we sit down and just go through a mock interview? And have some questions that you have kind of teed up to have the interviewer ask you so that you can practice your responses so that they flow really well.
Love that. Those are really, really good answers. And I really appreciate the fact that you started by saying that the big point of the interview is that truly and authentically, the person across the street or across the screen is just trying to get to know you. I think
Yeah.
as medical students, we sometimes just really overcomplicate things, and we think of like, okay, I have to say like the most use the biggest language I can, have all my research that I've done in my mind, when in reality it can just be like, hey, how are you? What do you like? What are your hobbies? Just a normal conversation across the screen. But of course, that's something that we want to be prepared for. And I've definitely heard horror stories with like Wi-Fi not working, laptop crashing
Mhm.
halfway through the interview. So very important to be ready.
Now, at the end of the day, we know that stuff happens, right? So if
Mhm.
your laptop happens to crash in the middle, like, we understand that that happens. And so, if that were to happen, yes, it's going to be producing some serious anxiety, but maybe have a backup plan to say, okay, now I'm going to go to my phone, or I have a tablet that I'm going to use. Like, take a couple deep breaths. It's not going to completely ruin the day. We understand that technology is not 100% foolproof all the time. So take a couple deep breaths if that does happen, but you can also prepare and try to prevent that as much as you can.
Yeah, I also really appreciate how you said just take a couple of deep breaths. I think it's important that have those strategies that calm yourself down, whether that's like
Yes.
positive affirmations, deep breaths. We are bound to get anxious when we're sitting across the screen, and this is truly a job interview, right? So I really appreciate that tip about deep breaths, because at the end of the day, we're going to be a little bit anxious.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. And also really interesting point about having the questions and asking those questions at the end. And you want to make sure that they're quality questions and
Mhm.
it's not just something on the surface level. So in your mind, is there too many questions that could be asked, or having like 2 to 3, that's a healthy balance?
Yeah, I think having 2 to 3 is definitely a healthy balance. I think it is certainly more important to have 2 to 3 really researched, well thought out questions than just have 7 questions that really don't show that you've done your research, etc. So the other thing that you can do is if you get the list of individuals that you're going to be interviewing with, you can take a look at their profiles on their program's website, and do your research there. So, like, for example, if we're interviewing, you could say, hey, Dr. Nick, I see that, you do mostly neuro rehab and spasticity management. Can you tell me about your spasticity clinic? Well, I'm going to say, wow, that is a really thought out question. You've done your homework. You've seen that, you've gone to my UK healthcare bio. You've seen what I do. And that really shows that you've gone above and beyond. And so a couple of questions there, and even if you can make them specific for your interviewer, sometimes I know you may not get your interviewer list, and that's okay. But if you're able to, get some really well thought out questions, that can really be impressive come interview day.
Absolutely. That's a really good advice. And who doesn't like to talk about what they do, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
definitely really good advice there. Okay. So for our second question, and I feel like this is probably one of the most dreaded interview question, which is tell me about yourself. There are a bajillion ways that we can answer this. What is your advice?
So my advice is to have a 90-second elevator pitch. So, right, you meet someone in the elevator and they randomly say, "Tell me about yourself." 90 seconds, that's how long the elevator ride is. That's how long, when you get that question of "tell me about yourself," that's what I would focus on. And within that 90 seconds, I would focus on what is important to you. So kind of some of the things that I would highlight is, what are your passions? For the sakes of this discussion, what are your interests? Why did you pursue PM&R? Is there something specific in PM&R? I think having that little pitch of about 90 seconds is really what I would aim for. I wouldn't start just discussing everything that's on your CV or your ARIS application. We'll get to that probably during your interview. So the "tell me about yourself" is what are you passionate about? And for the sakes of the interview, what drew you to PM&R? I think those are some good ways to really get across. Here's who I am. This is why I'm applying to your program. This is why I love PM&R, and go from there.
In a sense, it almost sounds like a very concise version of your personal statement in a sense, but
Yeah.
with a bit more touch of maybe some of the things that you like. And just sounds like, again, practice is the key to success here, and hopefully making sure that we're not coming across super robotic, right? Because I've
Yeah.
definitely, like, if you've practiced that 90 seconds like to the T in your mind and it's just coming across in a very monotone like this, then it's not coming, it might not have that like genuineness that you wish for it to have. So another great tip there.
Yeah. So let me give you an example, because I always do best with examples. So like my 90-second elevator pitch is not 90 seconds actually. But like what I would say if someone said, "Dr. Nick, tell me about yourself," I would say, "Well, I am a faculty member in APD at the University of Kentucky PM&R Residency program. I specialize in neuro rehab and stroke rehab and spasticity management. I graduated from Wilmington College in Ohio and went to LMU DCOM in Harrogate, Tennessee for my medical training, and I trained for PM&R at the University of Kentucky. I love the Kentucky Wildcats, the Cincinnati Reds, and I loved spending time with my family." Period. And that is
Man,
my 90-second. Again, I think that might have been 45 seconds, but that gives you a good idea of what I do, what my passions are. And then, right, if you want to talk about some of the research or some of the other things that I do, we can talk about that later on in the interview. But I feel like that is kind of my spiel. And that's actually when you're building your social media presence. That's what I always tell people is in their X profile, if they are on Twitter or X. That's what you want that your handle in your profile to be, is that 90 seconds. What is that all about you? So if you go to my profile, you're going to see all of that stuff, because that is me.
mhm, mhm. What are your thoughts on including a bit more of your hobbies or what you stand as? So, for instance, for me, I'm a plant mom. I have an indoor jungle in my room. Do you think kind of having that answer is broken into my professional life and my personal life? Like these are some of the other things I'm passionate about, or do you think it should solely be your journey to PM&R with like sprinkled hobbies or interests throughout?
Yeah, I think it depends on just kind of the sense of the conversation.
Mhm.
I as I go back to the first question and my first comment of, we want to get to know you. So I think incorporating, what makes you you, what are your hobbies, if you want to include about what took you to PM&R and what you're passionate about in PM&R. I think that is certainly important, and you can include that. I think if you don't include that, that'll probably come up further on, and it might be, "Hey, I saw you put this in your personal statement. Can you tell me about it?" And so I think it's really important, though, to add some personal characteristics to it, because, again, we want to get to know you for you.
Good to know. Great to know. All right. So moving on to strength and weaknesses. I feel like personally for me, you know, answering what are your strengths just kind of feels like a little bit bragging about myself. And that's like never been the most comfortable thing for me. So do you have any
Sure.
tips for when we're asked about what are your strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I think from a strengths perspective, I would take a look and look at the experiences that you have included on your ARIS application and talk about how those things at those particular experiences and what they instilled in you and how that is a strength. So, for example, if you have a couple of community service experiences, talking about, one of my strengths is my passion for community service. I did this, this, and this, and I learned, these particular aspects from this experience. So I feel like that is a strength that I can bring to a residency. Or if you're a leader in some way, shape, or form, whether that is a leader of your student interest group, a leader within a job that you currently hold, talking about, hey, this was this experience in leadership, this is what I learned, and that is why that is a strength and what I will bring to a residency. So that is how I would, I agree with you. It's really tough to say, oh, well, these are all my awesome strengths. You should, just love all these things. How I have found the best way to answer that question is tie it with the experiences, what you've learned, and how that has instilled a particular strength in you and what you bring to the program. The weaknesses question is tough, right? I actually, whenever I get that question, I used to, and I still do, is I kind of make a joke about it. I am so geographically inept, I get lost in a paper bag. And so I still use my GPS all the time. And so when someone says, hey,
Same.
Dr. Nick, what's a weakness of yours? I say, oh, I get lost in a paper bag. I have zero geographic sense. And so, kind of make a joke about it. That is a weakness of mine, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to, make a, have some humor behind it. But that is certainly a weakness that, who knows? I don't know if I'll ever improve. I will continue to try to, but that is what I typically do when I get asked that question.
Gotcha. I don't think we're getting rid of phones anytime soon, so I think that's a legitimate weakness to have because honestly, same. Very much so same. And that's a really good point because personally, I thought weaknesses had to be more so like academically related, but this adds in an opportunity for, just to lighten up the mood a bit, but also not everything has to be like PM&R focused
Mhm.
necessarily. So that's a really good tip there. Um, so another question, when we want to talk about like our personal interest in the field, I've heard both the advice of, oh, it could be premature for us to say, I know for instance, for medical school, that was one of the top advice, like, oh, if you're interested in field X, Y, and Z, you don't really want to say that because you haven't been truly exposed, things change. So now for residency, do you think talking about your interest is appropriate if, let's say, you're interested in pediatrics rehab or pain? Or do you think it's best to not necessarily share that?
Yeah, I definitely think there is a right and a wrong way to go about this. I am 100% okay if we're in an interview and you are really passionate about pediatric PM&R. I would love to know that. Just on the flip side, don't when you're answering, don't come across as if you are not interested in any other aspect of PM&R, right? There are many experiences that someone gets in the PM&R residency. And I am someone where I thought I was going to go into sports and spine medicine when I entered residency, and now I'm a stroke rehab doctor. And so it was experiences during residency that made me be like, wow, I am passionate about stroke rehab and spasticity management. And so I certainly encourage you to say, hey, this is what I'm interested in, but I'm looking so forward to the experiences of a resident and looking forward to inpatient and outpatient PM&R experiences and everything that a residency has to offer. Just don't, when you answer that question, don't come across as, oh, no, I don't want anything to do with any other field or any other aspect of PM&R, because then that could be a potential negative.
Mhm. That's a really good point. There's definitely an art of answering questions that you can like you said, come across either very closed off or say the same thing and just come across open-minded.
Yeah, so
Um,
I'll give you a personal example. During my
yes, please.
interviews, I was asked that question of what am I interested in PM&R, and in that particular time, as I mentioned, I thought I was going to do sports and spine medicine, and that was my answer. And I kind of didn't expand upon it because I was that set. And the individual said, "Oh, well, I'm actually an inpatient faculty member." And I kind of had to backtrack because I hadn't said anything because I kind of had well, my answer kind of closed off to say, hey, I'm pursuing outpatient, when there was definitely a better way that I could have answered that question to say, this is what I'm interested in now, but I haven't experienced much inpatient PM&R and really looking forward to that opportunity. So I could have opened with that and it wouldn't have made that conversation a little bit awkward when I had to backtrack my answer.
Hmm. Now, now talking about inpatient and outpatient, um, I think that's a question that, some of the applicants might be more interested in inpatient versus outpatient. Now, I almost feel like, again, there's this art of articulation that how you can ask it can come across either closed-minded or open-minded. For those who, or just, learning more about outpatient versus inpatient exposure in a residency program, because we all have different interests. And I think that's a very important aspect to know. Um, what are your advices on how to get a better understanding of how much exposure residents have in, inpatient versus outpatient when you're in an interview?
Yeah. So, there are ACGME guidelines for, how much inpatient, outpatient experience that you get. But if it is not covered in a presentation like before the interview day, I think, a simple question as, hey, can you discuss the inpatient and outpatient curriculum that your residents experience? You can leave it open-ended like that, and then based upon that particular person's response, you can say, oh, what about this experience or what about that experience? Now, if you have specific questions about like the structure, you can also say, hey, when do most of your residents do their inpatient experience? And they might say, oh, well, it's all in one year or it's spread out. And so you can start with a broad question if it's not already answered. And then if you want specific aspects of, if you have specific questions about, oh, when is the stroke experience or brain injury experience or spinal cord experience, then you can hone in on those questions. Now, if it's already been presented in like in a presentation at the beginning of the day, I would take that information and then ask a specific question. So, for example,
Mm,
if it's not covered of when you experience spinal cord injury and you're really interested in spinal cord, asking a specific question, hey, really interested in spinal cord injury medicine. When do your residents get to experience that during residency?
right. And one of the other really helpful tips I learned from you actually was even, like you said, if there's something that you're interested in, you can take it to the next level, but also, like, let's say outpatient and how much hands-on exposure like a resident has. So like knowing if there's a fellow, other medical students, and like if there's an outpatient experience per se, are you truly getting the, let's say if it's ultrasound guided injections that you're interested in, are you truly getting that experience? Or if there's two other fellows in the room, they'll have the seniority per se, and they're the ones doing it.
Yeah, every program is different in how it's structured and what fellowships are offered. And so just getting an idea of, hey, how is your outpatient structured? Are you and a senior resident together? Are there fellows? Just get an idea because, right, you can learn a whole lot from seniors and fellows as you're a junior resident learning how to do injections. Um,
Hmm.
and so just getting an idea of, hey, how are things structured? I think is a really good way to just open it up to be a broad question.
Hmm. And another point that I'm sensing is open-ended questions seems to be the right way to go rather than yes or no. Would you say that like in an interview, so your interviewee has a chance of like expanding on the topic?
Yeah, I think in a lot of scenarios it is, right? If you have a specific if you have a specific question about an experience, then I think that is definitely appropriate to be specific. I think where from asking an open-ended question would be, hey, maybe this part wasn't covered in the presentation, but I'm really interested in inpatient rounds and how you guys go about that. Leave that opportunity for the interviewer to have that open-ended response, as opposed to just specifically asking yes, no questions unless you have a specific question, right?
Right. Understandable. So now we're going to transition into, I guess, more general interview style questions that we had. So note taking during interview, right? Because a lot of times, lots of information is coming at you, and you want to have a piece of paper next to you. Do you think it's appropriate for applicants to be doing that? Because we definitely hear the advice of make sure you're having good eye contact, make sure you're looking not like at the bottom of your laptop, have like a little reminder so you're looking at the camera. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I definitely think notes are okay. What I would recommend is if you are taking notes, I would kind of mention that. So like I brought my notebook here, I have my notebook here, and if we're in an interview and you're gonna start asking me questions, I would say, hey, I'm gonna take some notes in my notebook if that's okay. Just so the person knows what in the world I'm doing. Um,
Right.
I've there are some folks that if you have a dual screen and you're taking notes like this, right, what are you seeing? You're seeing my left side profile. I want to see your face. I want to get to talk to you. And so I would recommend against, unless you really tell someone, hey, I'm taking notes on this other screen. I honestly think a pen and paper is the easiest. Say, hey, I'm going to take some notes as we're talking, and then looking up and taking notes, etc. I think it is really difficult because, right, I don't know if someone's taking notes, or are they playing solitaire, or are they playing a game on their other screen as we're going through the interview.
Right. Really good point. Always communicate because they can't see below, I guess, like chest
Absolutely.
regions. So who knows what we could be doing for
Yeah.
sure. Um, Now about thanking the program, because we want to come across, respectful, but also that, can highlight our enthusiasm. Would you say it's appropriate for applicants to thank the program at the beginning or at the end of the interview?
Yeah, I think at the end of the interview is definitely appropriate. You'll have a lot of this a lot of times then you start getting into the questions of what about thank you cards and email, etc. You will have some programs that say, hey, just don't bother with it. It doesn't make a difference. I always think it's nice if, at the end of the interview day, or, maybe the day after, sending an email to the program coordinator, program director, maybe some of the interviewers, just saying, hey, great to meet you, especially if you're really interested in the program. Hey, great to meet you. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think a thank you goes a really long way. I don't think it will necessarily, right, make or break someone come rank list time, etc. I just think it's a nice thing to do.
Gotcha. Noted. Um, I think that was pretty much all the questions that I had. This was a very, very helpful episode, I think, not only for myself, but for our listeners. We talked everything from strengths and weaknesses, talking about how to answer the most dreaded question, tell me about yourself. And I hope that our listeners find this episode as helpful as much as I did. And I wish all of us the best of luck on Match. So if you guys have a few seconds, please leave a review on our Spotify or Apple Podcast page and let us know what you'd like to learn in the future. Until next time, thank you so much, Dr. Elwert, for being with us here.
Thank you so much for having me.